The blue light of the sheriff's cruiser fractured through the rain-slicked glass of my living room, painting the cedar walls in violent, strobing bursts of azure and shadow. It was 4 a.m, the kind of darkness that feels heavy and absolute, especially here in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the home I had designed with my own hands 30 years ago, watching the scene unfold on the gravel driveway below. The relentless rain of Washington State hammered against the roof, a rhythm I usually found comforting, but tonight it sounded like applause. My hands, wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee, were perfectly steady. There was no tremor of age, no shake of fear. Inside the house, the silence was absolute, but outside, the chaos I had carefully orchestrated was finally reaching its crescendo. I watched as the young woman who had spent the last 6 months trying to dismantle my life, brick by brick, was led toward the patrol car. She looked back at the house, her eyes wild, searching the windows, and for a brief second our gazes locked across the distance. She saw me. She saw the woman she thought was senile, the woman she thought was crumbling, standing tall and unmoving in the flickering light. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I disagree. Justice is a structure best built slowly, on a foundation of absolute proof. To understand how we arrived at this rainy morning with police lights cutting through the fog, you have to understand the house. To anyone else, the structure perched on the cliff edge overlooking Puget Sound was just a piece of real estate, perhaps a valuable asset in a booming market. But to me, Eleanor Vance, retired architect and structural engineer, it was my magnum opus. I had drawn the blueprints on a drafting table in a cramped apartment when my husband, Arthur, and I were just starting out. We had poured the foundation together. We had chosen every beam of cedar, every pane of glass. When Arthur passed away 5 years ago, the house ceased to be just a building. It became a repository of memory, a physical manifestation of the life we had built. It was my sanctuary. And it was this sanctuary that Chloe, my son's new wife, decided she deserved more than I did. My life before Chloe arrived was defined by a peaceful, deliberate solitude. At 68, I had retired from my firm, leaving behind a legacy of skyscrapers and libraries to focus on smaller, personal projects. I spent my mornings sketching in my studio, the gray light of the Pacific Northwest perfect for drafting. I spent my afternoons hiking the trails that wound through my property, checking the structural integrity of the retaining walls, tending to the fern garden Arthur had loved. I was alone, yes, but I was not lonely. There is a profound difference between the two that only those who have made peace with themselves can understand. My son, Lucas, was the tether that kept me connected to the bustling world of Seattle, an hour's drive south. Lucas was a photographer, a man with a gentle soul and an eye for beauty, but he possessed a fatal flaw that he had inherited from his father. He projected his own goodness onto the world. He assumed that because he would never hurt anyone, no one would ever hurt him. It was a Tuesday in late October when the shift began. The maples were turning a brilliant, burning red against the evergreen backdrop when Lucas's car pulled up the winding driveway. He wasn't alone. As I walked out onto the slate porch, wiping charcoal dust from my hands, I saw her, Chloe. She stepped out of the passenger side with a kind of aggressive polish that seemed out of place among the ferns and moss. She was beautiful, objectively speaking, with sharp features and hair so sleek it looked like a helmet of obsidian. She worked in high-end real estate development, flipping luxury condos in the city. Lucas had told me they met at a gallery opening. He looked at her with a reverence that made my heart ache with a familiar maternal worry. "Mom, this is Chloe," Lucas beamed, his hand resting on the small of her back. "I've told her everything about the Glass Eyrie. She's been dying to see the architecture." "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Vance," Chloe said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her nails manicured to lethal points. Lucas is right. The cantilever design is impressive, though I imagine the upkeep on these older materials must be a nightmare in this climate. It was a subtle dig wrapped in a compliment. I smiled, the polite, practiced smile of a woman who has sat in boardrooms full of men trying to undermine her for 40 years. It requires vigilance, I admitted, but cedar, when treated correctly, outlasts concrete. Come inside. Dinner was a study in observation. I watched Chloe as she ate the salmon I had prepared. She didn't look at Lucas when he spoke. She looked at the room. Her eyes were constantly moving, scanning the vaulted ceilings, the exposed beams, the custom joinery. She wasn't admiring the art. She was appraising the asset. She asked about the square footage. She asked about the property taxes. She asked about the zoning laws for the surrounding acreage. "You know, Eleanor," she said, pouring herself a second glass of wine without asking, "this place is a gold mine, but it's so isolated. Don't you worry about being out here all alone? If you fell, it could be days before anyone found you. I have a cell phone, Chloe, and excellent neighbors down the ridge," I replied evenly. "Of course." She smiled, a tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. "But at your age, cell phones can be tricky. My grandmother had a fall last year. She lay on the floor for 12 hours because she forgot how to unlock her screen. It's just a reality of aging. The mind goes before the body sometimes." Lucas laughed nervously. "Mom's sharp as a tack, Chloe. She still consults for the firm sometimes." "For now," Chloe said softly, placing a hand over Lucas's. "But these things happen fast. It's just better to be prepared." That night, after they left, I stood by the window and felt a cold draft that had nothing to do with the weather. I had dealt with sharks in the business world, developers who would smile while they cut the budget for safety beams. I recognized the look in Chloe's eyes. It was the look of a developer seeing a tear down on a prime lot. The engagement happened fast. By Christmas, they were married. It was a small ceremony in the city, modern and cold, in a venue that looked like an industrial refrigerator. I wore a navy suit and smiled until my jaw ached. I wanted Lucas to be happy. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was the cliché of the overprotective mother. But my instincts, honed by decades of calculating load paths and stress points, were screaming that the structure of this family was unstable. The gaslighting began 3 months after the wedding. It started with small things, trivialities that I could easily dismiss. I would leave my reading glasses on the side table in the living room and later find them in the kitchen next to the sink. I would lock the back door before bed, a habit ingrained in me for 30 years, and wake up to find it unlatched, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. At first, I doubted myself. I was 68 after all. Was it possible? Was I slipping? I bought a notebook and started writing down where I put things. Glasses, library table, 2 p.m. Back door, locked, 9:30 p.m. Then came the visits. Chloe started coming over during the week when Lucas was on shoots. She claimed she wanted to bond, to help me with the heavy lifting of maintaining the house. "I brought you some groceries," she said one rainy Tuesday, breezing into the kitchen. "I noticed last time that your fridge was looking a little sad. You're probably forgetting to go to the market." "I go to the market every Saturday, Chloe," I said, watching her unpack kale and quinoa and expensive juices I didn't drink. "Did you?" She paused, holding a carton of almond milk. "Lucas said you called him on Sunday asking what day it was." I stared at her. "I never did that." "Oh, Eleanor, it's okay," she said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic coo. "It's scary to lose track. We don't judge you. We just want to keep you safe." She was rewriting reality in real time. I called Lucas that evening. "Did I call you on Sunday asking what day it was?" I asked him directly. Lucas hesitated. There was a long, painful silence. "Well, Mom, Chloe mentioned you seemed a little confused on the phone. She said you thought it was Monday." "I didn't speak to Chloe on Sunday," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "I spoke to you, I know, but maybe you forgot?" Lucas's voice was gentle. laced with that pity I was beginning to despise. "Mom, it's been a hard few years since Dad died. Maybe the grief is manifesting as confusion. Chloe thinks we should get you evaluated." My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just the misplaced objects. She was poisoning the well. She was planting the narrative of my incompetence in my son's mind. The escalation was rapid. A week later, I went into my home studio to work on a sketch for a friend's garden renovation. My drafting table, usually organized with military precision, was in chaos. My expensive compass set was missing. A roll of blueprints for the original house design, documents I treated like holy scripture, was gone. I tore the room apart. I knew they were there. I had used them yesterday. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. Was I losing it? Was this how it happened? You just wake up one day and the continuity of your life is broken. I drove into town, needing to escape the house that was suddenly feeling like a trap. I went to the bakery where I had bought bread for 20 years. The owner, a woman named Sarah, looked at me with a strange expression when I walked in. "Eleanor," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "I was so sorry to hear." "Hear what?" I asked, pausing with my hand on the display case. "About your condition. Chloe was in here yesterday getting pastries. She mentioned you were struggling with dementia. She asked if we could keep an eye out in case you wandered into town and got lost." The world stopped. The smell of yeast and cinnamon vanished, replaced by the metallic taste of adrenaline. It wasn't me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgetting. I was being framed. The rage that filled me wasn't the hot, explosive anger of youth. It was the cold, calculating fury of an engineer who realizes someone is trying to sabotage the foundation of her building. I thanked Sarah, bought my sourdough, and walked out. I sat in my car in the rain for an hour, breathing slowly, formulating a plan. Chloe thought she was dealing with a frail old woman. She didn't realize she was dealing with someone who knew how to calculate the breaking point of steel. I drove straight to Seattle, but not to see Lucas. I went to the office of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was an estate attorney and an old friend of Arthur's. He was 70, cynical, and had a mind like a bear trap. "Eleanor," he said, pouring me a scotch without asking, "you look like you're ready to murder someone." "I might be," I said, sitting down, "but I'd prefer to destroy them legally first." I told him everything: the moved objects, the gaslighting, the rumors in town, the missing blueprints. Marcus listened, his face unreadable, tapping a silver pen against his mahogany desk. "She's building a case for competency," Marcus said finally. "It's a classic move. If she can prove you're mentally unfit, she can petition for Lucas to get power of attorney. And since Lucas is soft and she's the shark, she'll run the show. They'll put you in a facility, sell the house, and cash out. The land alone is worth millions. I won't let her take my home, Marcus. I built it." "Then we need to be smarter than her," he said, leaning forward. "We don't confront her, not yet. If you scream and shout, you just look like the crazy old woman she claims you are. We need irrefutable proof. We need to catch her in the act." "What do I do?" "We create a trust," Marcus explained, pulling a legal pad toward him. "We move the deed of the house into a revocable living trust. You are the trustee. But we add a clause, a poison pill. If the property is sold or transferred without your explicit video-recorded consent, the proceeds are immediately donated to a charity of your choice, and we seal the records. So she won't know? Not unless she tries to sell it. But we need more than that. We need to prove the fraud. You need eyes inside that house, Eleanor." I drove back to the house that evening with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of a trap. The next day, I hired a private security firm. Not the local boys, but a high-end team from the city that installed systems for tech billionaires. I had them install micro cameras in the crown molding, hidden in the smoke detectors, and disguised as motion sensors. They were high definition, audio-enabled, and uploaded directly to a cloud server that only Marcus and I could access. I covered the living room, the kitchen, my studio, and the hallway. I turned my home into a panopticon. Then the performance began. I had to play the part Chloe had written for me. When she visited, I acted confused. I deliberately called her by the wrong name. I let my hands shake when I poured tea. "Oh dear," I said one afternoon, looking at the calendar. "Is it Thursday?" I could have sworn it was Sunday. Chloe smiled, a predator sensing weakness. "It's okay, Eleanor, it happens." She became bolder. The arrogance of the con artist is their downfall. They begin to believe their own lies. One afternoon, while I was pretending to nap in the sunroom, I watched on my tablet as she walked into my office. The camera feed was crisp. I saw her open my desk drawers. I saw her take out a checkbook. She practiced my signature on a scrap of paper over and over again. Then she pulled a document from her purse. It was a power of attorney form. I watched, heart pounding, as she forged my signature at the bottom of the page. She smiled to herself, a cold, satisfied smirk, and tucked the document back into her bag. I sent the video clip to Marcus immediately. "Got her," I typed. "Not yet," he replied. "Wait for the big move. She's going to try to transfer the title." The final act began in November. The rains had set in, turning the world gray and wet. Chloe called me on a Friday. "Eleanor," Lucas and I were thinking, "you've been seeming so tired lately. Why don't you go to that spa retreat in Oregon for a week? Just rest. We'll look after the house." It was the opening I had been waiting for. They wanted me out of the way so they could finalize whatever move they were planning. That sounds wonderful, I stammered. "I am so tired." I packed a bag. I let Lucas drive me to the airport to catch the connector flight. I hugged him goodbye, and it broke my heart to feel him tremble. He knew something was wrong, but he was too weak to stop it. He was letting her push me out. I waited until he drove away. Then I rented a car and drove right back to my property. I didn't go to the house. I went to the old caretaker's cabin on the lower ridge, a structure I used for storage. It had power, heat, and internet. I set up my command center. For 3 days, I watched the feeds. Chloe moved in. The moment I was gone, she brought in appraisers. I watched her walk them through my living room, pointing out the view, talking about renovation potential. "She's in a facility now," I heard her tell a real estate agent on the second day. "Sad story. Dementia. We have power of attorney. We're looking for a quick cash sale." The rage was a cold knot in my stomach. She wasn't just stealing my house, she was burying me alive. On the 4th night, the moving truck arrived. It was 3 a.m. She wasn't waiting for a sale. She was stripping the assets first. She was going to clear out the art, the antique furniture, the things she could sell at auction. I watched her direct 3 men into my living room. They wore muddy boots on my hardwood floors. "Take the painting," she commanded, pointing to the oil landscape over the mantel, a piece Arthur had bought for our 10th anniversary. "And the rugs. Be careful with that desk. It's mid-century modern. Worth at least 10 grand. One of the movers hesitated. "Is the owner okay with this? It looks like people still live here." "The owner is incompetent," Chloe snapped. "I have the paperwork. Just move it." I picked up my phone. I dialed the sheriff. Then I dialed Marcus. "It's time," I said. I drove up the ridge with my headlights off. I parked at the edge of the property and walked the rest of the way in the rain. I wanted to see her face. I wanted to be standing there when the walls came tumbling down. The sheriff's deputies arrived silently, cutting the sirens until they blocked the driveway. The sudden flash of blue and red lights against the wet trees was blinding. I watched from the shadows of the garage as the movers froze, holding my grandmother's vanity table. Chloe stormed out onto the porch, looking more annoyed than afraid. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, shielding her eyes from the glare. "I am the owner of this property." Sheriff Miller, a man I had known since high school, stepped out of his cruiser. "Ma'am, we received a call about a burglary in progress." "It's not burglary," Chloe shrieked. "It's my house. I have the deed." She waved a folder in the air. That's when I stepped out. I walked slowly into the pool of light. I was wearing my yellow raincoat, the one Arthur used to say made me look like a lighthouse. I held my head high. "Hello, Chloe," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rain like a diamond cutter. Chloe froze. Her face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. "Eleanor? You're supposed to be in Oregon, and you're supposed to be a loving daughter-in-law," I replied, walking up the steps until I was towering over her. "It seems we are both full of surprises." She stammered, trying to regain her footing. "Officer, this woman is mentally unstable. She has dementia. She doesn't know what she's doing." "I have power of attorney. Look at the papers." Sheriff Miller looked at me, then at Chloe. He took the folder from her shaking hand. He opened it, shined his flashlight on the signature. Then he looked at the tablet I held up. On the screen, the video of Chloe practicing my signature and forging the document played in a loop. "That's a very interesting video, ma'am," the sheriff said. "And according to the county records my dispatch just checked, this house is held in a trust. The trustee is Eleanor Vance. There is no power of attorney on file." Chloe looked at the tablet. She looked at the movers, who were already putting the furniture down and backing away. She looked at me, and the mask finally slipped. The sophistication, the polish, it all fell away, leaving behind a frightened, greedy child. "You can't do this," she hissed. "Lucas will never forgive you." "Lucas?" I asked. I pointed to the driveway. Lucas's car had just pulled up behind the police cruisers. I had called him 10 minutes ago. He got out of the car, looking pale and terrified. He looked at the police, the moving truck, and his wife holding forged documents. He looked at me, standing strong and sane. "Lucas, tell them," Chloe screamed. "Tell them she's crazy." Lucas walked up the steps. He looked at the video on the tablet. He looked at the signature on the papers the sheriff held. The realization broke him. I saw it happen. The shattering of his naive worldview. "You forged it?" Lucas whispered. "You told me she was sick. You told me she agreed to sell. I did it for us," Chloe yelled. "She's sitting on a gold mine, Lucas. We could have had everything. She doesn't need all this. She's just one old woman. That was the nail in the coffin." Lucas stepped back from her, as if she were radioactive. He stood next to me. "I think you should leave, Chloe," Lucas said. His voice was shaking, but his words were clear. "I'm afraid she can't leave, sir," the sheriff said, pulling out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and attempted grand larceny." I stood on the porch and drank my coffee as they put her in the car. The rain washed away the mud from the movers' boots. The silence returned to the forest, heavier now, but cleaner. The aftermath was a long, slow process of demolition and reconstruction. The legal battle was short, the evidence was overwhelming. Chloe took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, but her career in real estate was over, her reputation incinerated. Lucas moved back in with me for a while. He was a ghost of himself, haunted by the betrayal and his own complicity. He apologized 1,000 times. "I'm sorry I didn't defend you," he said one night, sitting by the fire. "I'm sorry I believed her." "You were in love, Lucas," I told him, sketching on my pad, "and you are a builder, like your father. You want to believe that if you put enough work into something, it will stand. But you have to check the foundation first. Some people are built on sand. We spent the winter quietly. I taught him how to read blueprints properly. We repaired the retaining wall in the garden. We didn't talk about Chloe much. We talked about structure. We talked about what lasts. I am 69 now. The house is still here, perched on the cliff, defiant against the storms. I am still here." I realized something during those dark months. Society tells women of a certain age that we are fading, that we should shrink, become invisible, hand over the keys to the kingdom, and go quietly into the night. They mistake our silence for weakness. They mistake our patience for confusion. But we are the architects of our own lives. We have spent decades pouring the concrete, welding the steel, weathering the storms. We do not crumble just because someone knocks on the door and demands entry. I finished my coffee and turned away from the window. The police car was gone. The dawn was breaking over the Sound, painting the gray water with streaks of gold. I had a busy day ahead. I had a garden to tend, a new design to draft, and a life to live. I walked to the kitchen table, where the blueprints of my home lay spread out, the ones I had retrieved from Chloe's bag before the police took her away. I smoothed the paper, traced the white lines of the walls that had protected me, and smiled. The foundation was solid. The structure held, and so did I. So to anyone listening who feels like the world is trying to push them aside, who feels the weight of underestimation pressing down on them, remember this: you are not a teardown. You are a fortress. And if they come for you, make sure you have the blueprints ready and let them break themselves against your walls. Tell me, have you ever had to defend your own sanctuary? Have you ever been underestimated because of your age or your kindness? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. We learn from each other's blueprints. If this story struck a chord with you, please like and share it. It helps us build this community, brick by brick. Until next time, keep your foundation strong.